Julian and Juliet were twin daughters of Mr. and Mrs. Frederick, who suffered from childlessness for a reasonable number of years, before they got the miracle twin girls. The conception of the twins brought much breakthrough to the family. Mr. Frederick, who had worked as a classroom teacher for more than 25 years, got promoted as a principal in a government secondary school. Their mother's business as a fashion designer blossomed immediately she took in for the twins. For the first time in their marriage of about 20 years, they bought a car of their own. When the ultrasound revealed that the pregnancy was a twin, there was real happiness in the home of the Fredericks, as God had actually settled them financially. Mr. Frederick got a loan from his bank and completed a building project he abandoned for more than 8 years. So, they packed into their own house when the pregnancy was just 5 months. Things really turned around for them, such that many who asked them, "Who were you yesterday?" began to ask them, "How are you?" So, they had no financial fears. Mr. Frederick did the shopping for the baby things by himself, as he did not want his wife to restrict him. In fact, he bought more than enough, all of which were mother care products. The joy of the family knew no bounds when Mrs. Frederick broke the yoke of barrenness by bearing 2 bouncing identical twins. Those who mocked them were put to shame. The weight of Mrs. Frederick, who used to be a very slim lady, tripled due to a rest of mind. The girls were so lovely that their neighbors nicknamed them the Golden Girls. Julian and Juliet were not only identical in appearance, but in everything. One did not eat, sleep, cry, fall sick, and so on, until the other did. When they fought, anybody who interfered, Julian and Juliet often turned around and merged to fight such a person. Their clothes, their hairstyles, everything about them was the same. Their similarities became a problem to the family. Their choices were also the same. They bore many similarities in everything: choice of color, food, clothes, etc., never contrasted but aligned together. They did everything together and were always in the company of each other. They went to school together, attended programs together, and went for picnics together. Each person was the joy of the other. Their parents sought a way to separate them a little, so that life would not be unbearable for them if they grow up and get married. Mr. and Mrs. Frederick tried to achieve that by enrolling them in different schools, but that spelt disaster when both of them nearly died. Their parents quickly returned them to the same school. Julian and Juliet started changing their temporary teeth together. They attained puberty together and started menstruating the same day. Ovulation also followed the same pattern. Their parents' major fear was how they would be able to separate from each other to get married. Julian and Juliet had often told their parents that they did not want to get married because they were not meant to be separated. That was like a bomb to their mom, who was always dreaming of having her grandchildren since Julian and Juliet happened to be her only children. They had been pressurizing their parents to take them to a seminary school because they desired to be Reverend sisters. Their parents had been scolding them about that, but they remained adamant, having made up their minds. "How can my only 2 children become Reverend sisters?" Their mother had asked them several times, but they insisted that when they had graduated, they would definitely proceed to become Reverend sisters. When the pressure from Julian and Juliet became too much, their parents decided to put them into prayers so that God could touch them to change their minds. The more Mr. and Mrs. Frederick prayed, the more the twins hardened their hearts and spoke their mind about becoming nuns, Rev sisters. Both of them gained admission into the same university to study the same course, nursing and midwifery, the same session. However, that did not stop their desire to proceed to the seminary. Julian and Juliet had deep interest in social media. They signed up for TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. They often had many likes and numerous followers, as their pairing brought much attraction to their videos. One day, as they were on a social media platform, they came across the interview of Peter and Paul, another set of inseparable twins. Julian and Juliet were excited to discover that Peter and Paul were exactly like them, who do not want to separate in their whole life for any reason at all. Julian and Juliet commented on the post of Peter and Paul, congratulating them for having the same idea and belief as them. Peter and Paul replied to their comments, and gradually they became social media friends. On a daily basis, Peter and Paul, who were social media celebrities, got closer and closer to Julian and Juliet, who as well had gradually become social media celebrities. Peter and Paul decided to pay a visit to the home of Julian and Juliet. They became greatly attracted to the Fredericks. In a no long time, Peter and Paul, his brother, got genuinely attracted to Julian and Juliet. The dream of becoming Reverend sisters was conquered when Peter and Paul proposed to them. The twin sisters agreed to marry the twin brothers. There was no debate about that, since Peter and Paul had the same philosophy of remaining together as long as they live. What a matching pair! Peter and Paul had built a mansion together. A very amazing wedding took place. The twin brothers and sisters moved into their home together. Surprisingly enough, Julian and Juliet got pregnant the same time and delivered the same day, a bouncing baby boy each. Many people wondered how it was made possible. Mrs. Frederick said she knew that it was going to be so because her twin daughters were just one person in two, a divine arrangement. Her greatest joy was that they were able to change their mind and gave her grandchildren. Till this day, Peter and Paul, Julian and Juliet, live together as one happy family.